All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time this evening to be part of this public workshop. We're very grateful to have public feedback, as that can definitely shape where funds are put to remove barriers, since people with disabilities are the people who benefit most from these barriers being removed. A quick set of introductions I'd like to do before I start the workshop presentation. And so I am Jennifer Salmon. I'm with Transportation Solutions. We're a transportation planning and engineering firm, and we've been working on ADA transition plans for the last 5 or so years. And then for the city of Sedro-Woolley, we have Mark Freiberger, who's the Director of Public Works and the ADA Transition Plan Project Manager. We also have Bill Chambers, the IT Director, who's facilitating this meeting. We have David Lee, the City Engineer, who will definitely be our expert in the public right-of-way with roads and streets and curbs and such. And then also, those are the hosts for the evening. And thank you. I now see we've got a couple more attendees, 7 total. So thank you for coming. And I'll go ahead and start the presentation. Okay. All right, I see everyone else is muted, but maybe Bill, if you want to just confirm this is what's showing for everyone.
Yes, I can see the ADA Transition Plan virtual workshop.
Perfect.
Initial slide.
Okay, great. As you can see, this photo on this slide is showing a picture of a sidewalk at a crossing of a northwest corner of State and Township, and it's actually near a bus stop. But there are curbs, but there are no curb ramps going into the road, so into the pedestrian crossing. So just to kind of get our minds thinking about where we experience barriers, that's the main goal of this meeting tonight. The agenda for tonight, we've got 4 goals. The first is to highlight the purpose of the ADA transition plan and what they're supposed to do. Second, we'd like to share existing barrier conditions in Sedro-Woolley with you, and we've got some figures and photos to share. Third, we'd like to partner with you about identifying and locating barriers that we may not have captured in our data. And then last, to prioritize barriers for removal. We have some methods to prioritize, but hearing your feedback is another way to prioritize barriers to remove them. We've done a little participating already. I do plan to stop and address questions when we have the following message up, the raise hand or write question in Q&A box. You're welcome to enter questions into the Q&A box at any time. We will attempt to address questions as they come in. I'll be keeping an eye out, as well as Bill, for raised hands or questions. And of course, there's more Q&A time after the presentation is done. To give you an idea, we have about 30 slides to get through. So if you're watching the numbers in the corner, that's what we have to go through. So first agenda item, what should an ADA transition plan do? The Washington Department of Transportation and the federal guidelines require 4 things: that the plan identify accessibility barriers, the plan should describe methods used to remove accessibility barriers. We also have to provide a barrier removal schedule, and that schedule has to have money as well as a time frame. And then identifying the public official responsible to implement the plan. When it comes to the barriers that we're looking at, Title II is what local and state governments are responsible to follow. And that means barriers that are under local and state government jurisdiction. Oftentimes there can be barriers that may be on property that's owned by private property owners. And so that is not within our jurisdiction. The types of barriers that we look at, I like to group them into physical barriers. We have public right-of-way barriers, that's streets, sidewalks, curbs, pedestrian crossings. But then you also have city building facilities around and in the building, and also city parks. Programmatic barriers are kind of the rest of the barriers that aren't physical in nature or have to do with a place. Examples of this could be, are you able to get information in an alternative format? Or are you eligible to participate in an activity like someone without a disability? We'll have some more details later, but those are the big overarching categories. So existing conditions for barriers in Sedro-Woolley is the next section. I know that many of you who are on our ADA advisory group, you guys know a lot about these barriers, but in case any of our attendees aren't familiar with some of these barriers, I wanted to go through some examples. So especially with the public right-of-way and physical features, the more prominent examples are that we have curb ramps, and curb ramps are where the sidewalk slopes down into a pedestrian crossing or a pedestrian route. And I have a picture showing an example of what a compliant curb ramp looks like that includes little domes with, they're called a detectable warning surface. I have another photo of something called a blended transition. And this is where sidewalks are even with the roadway. So there isn't a slope down to the roadway, but you still need some type of surface that's detectable to let someone know that they're moving into a roadway area. So these are some examples of what curb ramps and blended transitions should be like. But that is not always the case since we have older infrastructure. I have a pie chart here that's showing the Sedro-Woolley curb ramp inventory, and just over 50% of the curb ramps and those blended transitions are compliant. So Sedro-Woolley is actually pretty high on its compliance status. Other cities, it's typical that there could be, 10 to 20% compliance. So Sedro-Woolley is already doing very well, but there still is about 13% of curb ramps are non-existent, so they're non-compliant because they don't exist. Roughly a quarter are just, they exist, but they're non-compliant. And then about just under 10% are blended transitions that aren't compliant. So in total, just under half of our curb ramps are not compliant. And I see we have a question, so let's see if we can answer that now. Let's see. Bill, would you be able to read the question?
Sure. It's from Matthew, and the question is, the difference between a curb ramp and a blended transition is one is sloped and the one is not. Is that correct?
Correct. I'll go back a slide to the photos. And yes, the slope is the main difference. And the other engineers on the panel, if you want to provide any other comments, you can. But my understanding is that both curb ramps and transitions are when you're going from a pedestrian route to going to a crossing of a roadway that's used by vehicles. For those who can't see the pictures, the important thing is that if you have a pedestrian user who has to cross a roadway, you have to have some warning that your pedestrian route has something else competing with it. And so the detectable warning surfaces, the little domes that often are painted yellow, but it's a warning surface. And that's something that a mobility device, you feel it underneath you, or a person using a walking cane can feel in front of them. It's a warning that your pedestrian path is now going to be crossing another roadway user type.
In general, too, where the difference between the blended transition and the ramps is ramps, you'll see where you're going to have curb and gutters, and you need to make up for that 6-inch difference where you get the slope, where blended transitions are generally here in areas where there's no curb and gutter along the roadway.
Thank you, David. That was a better description, whether there's a curb or not. Okay. I have a physical feature inventory map, and just want to highlight that curb ramps, the compliant ones are located on State Route 20 and State Route 9, kind of the main, kind of heavily used major arterials in the city, the state routes. And the areas where you have more of the non-compliant ramps are in the residential areas, especially in the south of State Route 20, and kind of around State and west of Township. So these older residential neighborhoods that were built oftentimes before the ADA law came into existence, those older sidewalks, there are sidewalks and curb ramps, but they're just not built to those current standards.
I see one other question there.
Okay.
Shall I read it?
Yes, please.
From Eric. So a non-compliant blended transition would be that it doesn't have indication area for an individual.
Yes, a lot of times it is missing that detectable warning surface, those raised dots, or it has an old kind that may not be, might have been worn from use. And sometimes it's because like that portion of the route, kind of the sidewalk into the roadway is, you know, there's sidewalk upheaval, there's cracks. It could be a number of things that make that transition from the sidewalk to the crossing or route a problem. Okay. All right, I'll continue. The next set of slides are pictures I'll describe of some physical barriers around Sedro-Woolley. So first, missing curb ramps. I found an example of a tree at a corner in one of the older residential neighborhoods. And the tree roots grow underneath the sidewalk panels. And then those sidewalk panels have upheaval, they become uneven, and that presents a barrier to mobility devices, as well as, you know, people with other physical mobility, just pedestrians walking. It's a tripping hazard as well. I see another question.
So a question from Clifford. Clifford Snow, just a comment. I see that you are missing some of the curb ramps and sidewalk in your map.
I can go back to the map here. Clifford, could you talk some more? This map is not intended to show sidewalks. It is focused on curb ramps, but yes, please do. Could you comment a little more?
Sure. I did an inventory last year of all the sidewalks and curb cuts, lack of curb cuts in Sedro-Woolley.
Okay.
And I just cut a couple of them. Highway 9 going north of 20. There is a little development that's got kind of a little circle shaped to it.
Okay.
Into the cul-de-sac. Right there by your cursor, you're right there. You're missing curb ramps in there. There's curb ramps, but there are no tactile pads, as I call them.
Okay.
And then just to the south and a little bit east, there's a road, and I can probably zoom in and see what that is. Carriage Court, I think it's called. There are sidewalks, and there are just a handful of curb ramps in there. I think there's only 3 curb ramps in there. And that was just kind of a glance. The other ones are too busy to notice.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm happy to share my data with you.
That would be wonderful if you could share your inventory with us. And is that an inventory you're doing by like a spreadsheet, or are you doing it by a map, or?
So all the data I have is available on OpenStreetMap.
Okay.
It's there right now. Just a little quick background. I got involved with the Tasker Center run by Anat Caspi at UW.
Okay.
And she's the director of the Tasker Center for Accessibility and Technology or something like that.
Okay.
And so we've mapped the entire county, sidewalks, wow, curb cuts, curb ramps. There's bound to be errors because, you know, we're human. Mm-hmm. We make errors, but that's why I was interested in this. We do have a full inventory, and there definitely are some areas that, as you pointed out, need fixing.
Okay, yes, that'd be wonderful. I can definitely follow up with you on that resource.
Okay, yeah, happy to help.
Okay.
Clifford, I had a question there where you were looking at the Summer Meadows off Highway 9.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that the streets there, Presidio and Summer Meadows, where you're saying that we're not showing ramps. On the map, you can see the yellow dots, which are,
on yours. Oh, I guess I do see them now.
yeah, they're
There
there,
was-
and they're noting that they're not compliant.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what the different colors on there.
The yellow is not showing up on my monitor hardly at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that.
And then the other one you were mentioning was Carriage Court.
Yeah.
That's the mobile park off
Right.
Highway 20. Yeah,
I
because
think that's what it is.
yeah, because that's a private facility.
Yeah, see, I don't care whether it's private or because
Oh, okay.
people need to get around whether it's private or public.
Correct.
Yeah.
Again, as Jennifer mentioned, that's kind of then out of our jurisdiction to handle. But okay, I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that's
thank
where
you.
you
Yeah,
were at.
thanks for that.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. See if there aren't any other questions at this point, I'll continue. So we talked about the missing curb ramps, and then this is a zoomed in detail of the same location where the tree roots are causing upheaval in the sidewalk sections as well. That's a tripping and a wheelchair mobility device hazard. And that's just with, that tree upheaval is something that is, it will happen in the future. And there are barriers that we don't have now that will come into existence as trees continue to grow. The next image is of a location where there is a missing blended transition. So it's a sidewalk it's an older neighborhood, and it's going into the roadway, but there's no detectable warning surface to let a pedestrian know that they're going from an accessible route into a roadway where there could be a conflict. I think we have another question.
It's from an anonymous attendee. Comment, Summer Meadows is my neighborhood, and those cuts are perfect for denoting the T section. One is flat and sloping like a driveway, noting one corner, and the other is directly across from the other curb and a small dip. So just a comment.
Okay. Bill, do you know if these comments can be saved in text form or?
Yes, they are automatically saved with the recording.
Okay, great. Thank you to that participant. Those type of details, we definitely want to follow up with to better understand those locations. Maybe we could do that a little later in the presentation. We've talked a bit about missing detectable warning surfaces. They're called raised or truncated domes, and they often are painted yellow. So again, when those are missing, a pedestrian doesn't know they're entering a shared roadway. Another concern is the width of the path of travel. And so an example on Monroe Street in Sedro-Woolley is an older sidewalk that has a very narrow path to travel on. So a mobility device could possibly hit the edges or be, can trip up when trying to travel on that path. I believe the standard width for a sidewalk is, I think it's 48 inches. I would need to confirm that, but I believe.
Well,
that's the-
any more minimum width would be 5 feet,
5 feet, okay.
but a lot of early early walks, the width would have been 4 feet.
Okay. And as well, we have, besides the narrow width of sidewalks, we also have places where sidewalks are missing. So on Wicker Road, we have a segment of sidewalk that it just ends, and then there's grass for part of a private property home's yard, and then a driveway, and there's no sidewalk there. So again, there is that private property versus right-of-way jurisdiction, but the city does, the city is working to make sure that sidewalks are connected wherever they are under city jurisdiction. Okay, so those were some examples of physical, like public right-of-way barriers. When it comes to buildings and park barriers, the federal guidelines have, there are federal checklists to look at barriers. And so they're in 4 categories. The first is the approach and entrance to the facility, and that includes parking, the route from parking to the entrance, and then the entrance itself, doors, the ramps, curb ramps, and steps. So we have the exterior, and then the next level is the interior access. Again, routes within the building and some of the built-in objects. Counter heights are significant, so that people in mobility devices have a low enough counter to interact with staff. Seating, to make sure there's space for mobility devices or persons with other disabilities. And then doors, there's restrictions on how heavy doors can be when you try to push them open. Restrooms and showers are another category for barriers, and signage is important to let people know which facilities are accessible. The location and height of the plumbing fixtures and soap dispensers and hand dryers, there are regulations for that, as well as grab bars for those plumbing fixtures. And then another category is other amenities and emergency services. So the height of drinking fountains and telephones, if they're made public, as well as fire alarms that give warnings in audible and visual ways. So buildings and parks can have a lot of features just within themselves that could present barriers. So here, as some of you have already been doing, telling us about physical barriers you experience. What types are they? Are they in, sidewalks, curbs, pedestrian crossings? Are they in city buildings or parks? And letting us know where those are. So if there are any questions or observations you'd like to discuss, we could do about, let's see, it's 6:30. So why don't we see about 5 to 10 minutes. If there are questions we could work through now. Let's see. I think I'd like to maybe, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to go to Google Maps in case there were any locations we wanted to zoom into together, if that is helpful to any of the participants.
Shall I unmute the participants to make it easier?
Sure. Just gonna bring up a Sedro-Woolley map and share that screen. Okay. So I heard that there was that comment regarding, I believe, Carriage Meadows and some of the curbs there. So let me look for that here.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Yeah, there
Oh, you
found
can
it.
hear me. I raised my hand, so I'm sorry, because I didn't know if you could hear me. This is Judy. I was the anonymous commenter and I didn't realize I was coming in anonymous.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm the one that lives on Summer Meadows and I am blind. And for me, using a white cane really is I can see where the one curb cut might be non-compliant. But for me as a cane user, of course, I think those are great because that's the thing. When you are on the T side of a T intersection like that, and our house does happen to be on that, you do need to note some kind of landmark or something, or just simply cross to the other side of the street if you want to catch that that corner curb at the T when you want to go down, say, the stem of the T, like going down Presidio Way. But to have those curb cuts there, I'm thinking, wow, that's in a perfect world. That's really great.
Let's see. Okay, Summer Meadows.
It's
and
on the, let me think, they're on the east side of the street where Presidio Way comes in. Like you would be to get to Presidio Way, you would cross Summer Meadows heading west, and then there's the stem of the T, which would be Presidio.
Right there.
Yeah, those are awesome. Those are awesome for blind people.
But they would be, again, those look like older ones that the detectable pattern is the diamond stamp in the concrete.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
To get them into compliance, then you'd redo them a little bit to account for the slopes, but then to get the newer updated, the yellow
Sure.
detectables on there.
Sure.
And
I
then,
mean, for me, what makes them so detectable is the slopes and the different slopes. But I do understand what you're saying.
I notice 2 more questions, Q&A. You want me to read those?
Yes, please.
So both from Matthew. The first one, tree roots are a challenge for me on my bike, particularly on Ferry Street. And the second is, although sometimes I do feel like a hot rod jumping over them on a 3-wheel bike.
Oh, Matt. I love it.
Wait, gotta keep life exciting. Okay, so Ferry Street, let's look at some of these. Okay. I'm gonna plop down the viewer here to make sure I'm on the right street here. Okay, I'm guessing kind of the western part of Ferry, or eastern part of Ferry Street. Trying to see here. Maybe where there might be any really bad locations. And
think
Matthew, if you're out riding and you come across some that you think, oh, these are really bad, that could be helpful with our online survey, that you could go in and pinpoint those locations. It is help. I will include in the report that you list Ferry Street in general. However, that the map enabled survey can be helpful for some specific locations.
Okay, I didn't fill out that form, but I'll do that.
Okay.
And Matthew commented that he posted a comment by the old Heritage Bank.
Okay.
East to the bank, east to the old bank on the south side of the street.
Okay.
I can try using the map and the neighborhood survey. I never.
Okay.
Yeah, I was seeing where he's talking about there.
Okay.
Yeah, there are ramps, but the tree that's right there in the corner is creating the issues.
Okay. David, the Heritage Bank or Old Heritage Bank, do you know about what cross street that is? Or
You're going to be at Puget and Ferry, southeast corner.
okay, I'm gonna write that down. Puget and Ferry, southeast. Ah, okay.
Yeah,
So
that tree.
I see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, it's that tree.
Yep. If you're, I could see how if you're approaching from a direction and you do a little toe pick on the bike, which isn't very fun. Okay.
Jennifer,
right.
could I ask
Do you
one
want me to use
question?
a map survey, or
What was that, Matt?
do you want me to fill out the map? Do you want me to note that on the map survey now that you've already found it?
If this was the main problem, then you don't need to do the survey. I can remember Puget and Ferry.
Okay, thank you.
But any other locations like that that you are aware of, yeah, get those on the map or let us know somehow, please.
I'm sure there are. That's the one that comes to mind.
Okay, that's been about 10 minutes, so I'm gonna continue on if there aren't any other comments for now.
I had a comment. This is Brenda.
Okay,
Actually, I had two. I'll make it quick. At a very busy street, the corner of State Street and Township has been my major complaint, with
Okay.
only one ramp out of the 4 areas that they could. That's my danger spot. With my walker, I've just about toppled over it. But I have also witnessed people coming out of the facility right there. I don't know if it's low-income housing or assisted living, but people coming out in wheelchairs, not even anything accessible. They have to go with their wheelchair to the driveway. There we go.
mm-hmm.
They have to go to the driveway of the housing department and then cross where there is no markings for a sidewalk, and then they go in the opening at Inspire Church, right where that white vehicle is going in.
Okay,
So there's only one ramp out of all of those junctures. And with everybody that's the main street that people walk on, because there are a lot of streets that are absolutely horrible, Bennett being one.
Okay,
Bennett Street, I've walked in the middle of the road because it's too dangerous on either side of the sidewalks. So this is my complaint here, my big complaint, because it's such a high traffic area, and what I've seen also, it's just not me.
okay. And I also think there's a bus stop,
Yes.
state and township, which is another concern.
Right about where your arrow's at is
Okay,
where the bus stop is at. Yes, ma'am.
okay,
And Matthew
those.
posted in the Q&A that he agrees that intersection is tough for him as well.
Okay. I will make note of that. 2 participants called out that location. So corner of State and Township, and also Bennett Street sidewalks.
Bennett Street sidewalks are so dangerous. I just avoid it. I've walked in the middle of the road with my walker because there's a lot of street parking, but
Okay.
it is so uneven, and absolutely, my good friend was hanging on the back of my pants on the sidewalk because she thought I was going to go down until we got to the middle of the street. But this intersection is a very high traffic one, and I just couldn't believe that there was only one ramp in that whole place. But
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for listening.
Oh, yes, thank you for the input. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to the presentation. And let's see. We're over halfway through the slides, so we're on slide 19 now. So we're doing well. Want to be respectful of your time. So we've talked about physical barriers. The next question has to do with prioritizing physical barriers. And so there are a number of different types, and if you do our online survey, that's one place you can also rank barriers. I have them listed here. We have missing curb ramps, missing pedestrian crossings, missing accessible pedestrian signals, and missing sidewalks. So just where a facility is missing, and then also some of the other barriers such as sidewalk cracks and bumps, fixed objects such as poles or such in the path of travel. Overgrown vegetation can be a problem that's seasonal, and then, you know, building facilities or others. So I know that's a lot. If you can't prioritize them now, the online surveys that I'll give direction to later, that's a place where you can rank them from 1 through 8 as well. So maybe I'll leave a couple, if there's anyone who has a strong opinion right now, you're free to share. Okay, looks like we have one question or one response.
Yes, it's from Matthew. Can I ask what an APS is?
Yeah, accessible pedestrian signal. There are accessible pedestrian signals are for crossing roadways where there are streets or where there are motorized vehicles. And so it is when you cross the street, there is the visual signal, either of a person or a hand flashing to stop and go. And there also would be an audible signal, a voice or a chirping. And then also that the pedestrian button itself has vibro tactile features. So there's a lot of components for an accessible pedestrian signal.
And a perfect example of that in town is the hawk signal that's between Reed and Puget on Highway 20. That is a APS compliant signal there. The ones at Highway 20 and Ferry Street are as well, I believe.
Oh, another way to think about prioritizing barriers could also be in terms of where they are. And I think that's my next slide. So the what type of barrier as well as the where. And on this slide, I do list some of those areas such as transit centers, their routes and stops, grocery and retail stores, schools and libraries, your residence, city buildings and the post office, medical clinics, parks and trails, others. So there's both the what to prioritize and the where to prioritize. And I can go back and forth between these slides for the questions.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read them off from Matthew, three of them. I love that, I think. Yeah, I love that signal on Highway 20. He depends on it.
Okay. Yeah, that's the hawks are hawks and something called a rapid repeating flashing beacon. There's some new kind of mini signal ways for pedestrians to increase safety. Was there another question?
No, that was it.
Okay. I went too far forward. So yeah, the which types of barriers and where to remove barriers. These questions are in the online survey that you could do at a later time. So you know, our plan has been, we have been prioritizing curb ramps and prioritizing barriers that are close to all these types of facilities. These are recommended in the federal guidelines that it's important that barriers are removed on routes for these at these locations, as they are likely to be used by members of the ADA community. And I misspoke earlier. RRFB is rapid rectangular flashing beacon. I think there's one by one of the schools. Is that correct, Mark or David? Or is that a hawk?
Well, the hawk is on Highway 20. There's one on North Highway 9 for the Cascade Middle School crossing, and then another block up across Highway 9 at the John Liner McGarrigle intersection for kids heading down to Evergreen.
Okay.
And we have a couple more locations. One on
State High School on State.
Right, State and 8th. And then on Fruitdale, North Fruitdale at the east end of McGarrigle, we've put one there because that's where the shared use path would cross North Fruitdale, and then you can get on it to head north up to the Swift Center.
So that could be another, if you're thinking about instances where you've had, you feel there's been a barrier, pedestrian crossings, having that route that you can cross. If there are really long blocks, I mean, Sedro-Woolley's smaller, but there could be places where there's perhaps a really long block. And thinking about how an RFB could provide an accessible route across a long block. That could be one way to think about them as useful. Okay, I think I'll move on in the interest of time. So now we'll talk about the programmatic conditions. Programs, again, we're trying to think about the non-physical barriers. And so some of the programmatic items, they're policies or people and roles that the government requires. So the city has to have an ADA 504 coordinator. 504 has to do with a 1973 or 1974 law about non-discrimination. And the ADA came in the 90s, as I'm sure many of you know. So this is to make sure that we're not discriminating in federally funded as well as non-federally funded public spaces. Local governments also have to have a public ADA notice that acknowledges that they're an agency that does not discriminate based on disability, and then also they will provide effective communication. We have to have, or the city needs to have a grievance procedure, including an appeal process, so that if you have a grievance, there's expectations that are followed for when a person submitting a grievance will get a response and how that's handled and who handles it. And then also cities need to have a policy regarding installation of accessible pedestrian signals. And this is something that the state of Washington requires. And so currently the city of Sedro-Woolley doesn't have any accessible pedestrian signals at a signalized intersection. Those currently, those are only on state routes that are under WashDOT's responsibility to maintain. So the city has adopted WashDOT's policy, even though the city doesn't have any at the moment. Some other areas for programmatic accessibility have to do with the website. So there's some different standards out there for making your website accessible, and then making sure to provide printed materials or materials in other formats. We hope that this meeting has been accessible. The slides in both PDF and PowerPoint format are available for download on the website if you want to revisit these materials later. And that has alternative text. Also, eligibility to participate in programs. This can come into play in the Parks Department, especially, just to make sure that people with disabilities have the opportunity to participate as, you know, in an equally accessible way. And then also, as mentioned, alternative format requests for information or services. So again, the same types of questions, trying to get some feedback from you if you have any on the top of your head about where have you experienced barriers to access with these policies and procedures and services. I've listed some of the areas I just mentioned to maybe spur your mind of whether it's the website or getting information has been a challenge, or participating in public meetings, has that been a challenge? If any of those things come to mind, you could write a question now or share them via a survey later. I'll give you a minute here to kind of think if anything comes to mind. I know sometimes that's hard off the top of your head.
So I do see one question,
Okay.
and it says anonymous. Is that Judy? As an example, if a parent of a blind child wanted their child to participate in a city park's recreational activity, who is the best contact?
I can take a first stab at answering that question. I think that's one place where the ADA coordinator has a role. That the ADA coordinator is the person that that's who you could send the request to, and that person can work with the Parks Department staff to ensure that to the maximum extent feasible, the child who's blind can participate. I don't know if Mark has any other added weight, since we don't have a parks person here at the moment to comment.
Yes, we don't have a parks coordinator per se, which would probably be the logical second contact from the ADA coordinator. Since a lot of our programs are handled by private groups right now, that would be the only thing we could do is refer. But we certainly, that's a very good question. And I think we want to give that some thought here as the city and see how we would handle a request just like that one. We are working, not the same as blindness, but we are working to make all of our playgrounds fully accessible. They're not all now, but we are improving those. And so that's an ongoing process. And our park supervisor, Nathan Salsina, will have some information available for that for our coordinator.
Judy, if you, in your experience, have best practices recommendations, we would be glad to have them.
Okay, I unmuted, and I wanted to thank you for that response, because you know, that scenario can come up, and I asked the question really because I'm, you know, fairly new to the area and was just curious about that. So I think that's really great. And like, as far as best practices, I think, you know, they're going to, of course, vary depending on, again, what the city has in place to deal with situations like that. And I think the attitude that I see here of just, you know, just being totally inclusive of people with disabilities and everything just goes a long way to, you know, to welcome people to participate. And that's complimenting Sedro-Woolley. You know, that's complimenting you guys. You guys are awesome.
I think it's definitely a team approach to figure out how to give, you know, create accessible environments, since, you know, I don't know what it's like to be a person who is blind and wants to participate in activities. And so hearing from people who can speak to, here's a way you can do it. You'll learn from the wisdom of our community members. So
Oh, sure. I mean, these kids, they could do track, they could do, I mean, I have no idea what the, what the recreational are, like if there was any swimming, that would be certainly game for that. Any kind of, field games and things like that. Yeah, and like you said, if these are done by private entities, I can see where the ADA coordinator would be working with those and with the parent, but I think it's wonderful, the networking that can occur. And I mean, a blind kid can do everything but see and drive a car. So, I mean, there's, kids are going to be kids and they're going to be active and want to do things. So thank you very much for, fielding the question.
absolutely, thank you for asking. Okay. Well, I'll move it. Oh, another question came up. Great.
From Clifford. When will the documentation be on the website? Right now, under documents, it says they will be available in February 2021.
If you look under the how you can be involved section where the link was for this webinar, these slides are available there. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Couldn't find the unmute button.
Okay, great. All right, we're doing well on time, 2/3 of the way done with time and slides. Feel free to ask the question if it arises, but we'll keep moving. Again, the prioritization question about, which types of barriers are most important to remove in your experience or what you've observed, and also where to remove them. And this may be a helpful way to think about it. Do you have barriers in the digital services, the website, or, accessing services online? Or is it somehow the in-person services you've seen or dealt with challenges? That's another way to think about the where when it comes to these programmatic barriers. I can say with respect to the website, Bill has been great about working to make the website accessible. And we're really mindful of making, thinking ahead to try to make our presentations accessible with alternative text. So a shout out to Bill on his very positive and very helpful manner in supporting that for the city. So I've been mentioning surveys. A number of you have already filled out a survey. You can fill these surveys out again if you think of another barrier you want to mention, or you can also if there's a place that you want to mark on a map, we do encourage using that map-enabled survey. And those links are on the ADA transition plan page where you found this link to join the webinar. We also have a screen reader friendly version as well that doesn't have the mapping feature, but it does provide space for you to write out and describe where you have experienced or seen barriers. And I think there's a question.
From Matthew, I would prioritize in-person services in my opinion, but I don't feel like I experience programmatic barriers personally.
Okay. I have noted that. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, especially during COVID, the nature of how services are provided right now is unique. And so that's very good for us to keep in mind that we still need to provide those in-person services. Yes, so links for these surveys are on the city's ADA Transition Plan Project webpage. This slide has the link. You can also get to it by going to the City of Sedro-Woolley website. In the top bar, there's a resources tab and an ADA transition plan menu item, and that can take you straight to the page that has the surveys as well.
Looks like there's one more question.
Okay.
Matt says the city scene, I think, says the surveys in November 8th. Is that still true?
That is correct. We wanted to move forward with consolidating the results. Those surveys have been open since the beginning of October, I believe. Currently, our plan is to close them on the 8th. If that changes, we would communicate that on the website, but that is our plan right now, to close them on the 8th.
Is there a way that those could be accessed more as just a place where anytime someone finds something, they can go and log something in or make a comment?
I think that we can discuss how to do that. I just have to check to see if anything in the survey says anything about how the information will be used. It may, if we wanted to use them going forward, it may be helpful to just rewrite some things. I'd have to look into that, but I think there's a way we could have some type of survey always available.
Okay, yeah, it just seems something that anyone can use at any time to get us information.
Okay. Okay.
This is
Yeah,
Judy.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm sorry. I just had to think maybe like an ongoing survey or something could take the form of a message box or something that that's something where people could just actually fill in the information or fill in their updated information, even as a message that could just be shot over, like a message form that would be on the website, not necessarily a survey per se, but just where they could leave updated information on ADA issues like that. Is just my suggestion. I thought it might be pretty simple.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. The surveys are trying to get to some of those prioritization questions that may not, I could discuss with Mark as project manager about, do we want to make it a little more open-ended, or do we want to keep it to ask these really specific targeted questions?
There's one other question here.
Okay.
From Matt. I will try to think of my problem areas by November 8th, Sunday.
Thank you, Matt. And you can always reach out to, Mark's listed as the project manager. So if something happens after the 8th, we're here to listen.
I think it's a good discussion line, actually, and I'm looking at the website right now. I'm thinking one of the things we could do is add a paragraph on our ADA policy page that just gives a contact for ongoing concerns or comments that they can send into the city. So that can be an ongoing thing. And I think David was correct. That's the best way to handle that. So we'll put something together on that. Thank you, Matt.
Okay. The last few slides are kind of, now that you get the idea that we're inventorying where we have barriers. We're thinking about how to prioritize which barriers should be removed first, and your feedback really helps us with that. So the intention is that we're going to implement these barrier findings into the ADA transition plan, and we're going to do that by including this public feedback and the survey findings in our prioritization criteria. The best practices for ADA transition plans, they want to involve members of the ADA community throughout the process. And since members of the ADA community are most affected by barriers. Our plan will develop a schedule for barrier removal, and that will have money and a time frame. So that schedule likely will be focusing on what's going to get done in the next usually 6-year period. That's often how transportation departments think about their finances. And so we're going to be, looking at what projects are already planned that are going to be removing barriers and what other money there may be to do some more barrier removal. We're also going to develop monitoring tools to track barrier removal, and ways we can do that are annual progress reports. And that can be, a written update to let the community know what's been accomplished in the last year. And another form that could take is a map of results, since we shared the map earlier where we have curb ramps. That's another possible way to share how barriers are getting removed. And we also look at the plan as something that will require future updates and attention. So people often describe an ADA transition plan as a living document. In some ways, it's, we continue to make progress towards more compliant facilities, but there can be new barriers that come up, like those, sidewalk upheaval, because trees keep growing. So we keep working on this plan into the future. A little more of the detail about how the city has already worked to prioritize curb ramps is we look at how close are these barriers to planned city projects. There are some requirements with certain types of projects that if you do something in the roadway, you may also need to do the curb ramps. So we're looking at those types of projects to estimate what the city will do in the coming months and years. We also have been looking at ramps that are close to likely ADA destinations that I listed earlier, transit, retail and food suppliers, schools and libraries, senior center and care facilities, and some civic buildings and services, medical services, and recreational parks and trails. The city also has rated their curb ramps. So we have missing being the worst grade of D. And then we have non-compliant ramps, but some are bad and they get a C grade. And then some are a bit better and they get a B grade. So we have some ways to look at curb ramps from a rated perspective. And we also have public feedback. So there's a lot of ways that we're trying to consider factors to influence which curb ramps will be addressed before others. For other physical barriers, the city has some other ways to prioritize them. Again, we have planned city projects. The city has funds for addressing sidewalks and parking barriers as part of existing projects. Buildings and parks usually undergo upgrades as part of planned capital facility projects. I heard that the city is going to be getting a new library. So new buildings do have to be built to current ADA standards. So there is also that to consider. We have an accessible pedestrian signal policy that will be in this transition plan. And we again will look to public feedback. Then for prioritizing programmatic barriers, we do have some administrative requirements that the Washington Department of Transportation requires us to do as part of the ADA plan. And so we will have an ADA 504 coordinator. We have a grievance procedure. The city already does a public notice of ADA provisions, and we are adding an accessible pedestrian signal policy as part of the plan. These are these short-term items that the plan addresses to meet the WSDOT requirements. We'll also take in consideration public feedback. And then there are longer term items that the city will continue to address regarding access to information, making sure we can provide effective communication and website accessibility. There is a long questionnaire that city staff filled out that go into these areas, asking them how they and their departments address accessibility, and that also includes emergency communication, eligibility and participation for programs, the facilities that currently exist and where the public uses them. And if it's applicable, if and when the city operates tours or transportation, whether it has public meetings, when and how they're administered, and then also use of contracted services and employment procedures to make sure that the non-discrimination is upheld when work gets outsourced, and also for current employment practices. So there's a broad range of programmatic areas for being compliant with the ADA. So with 6 minutes to spare, we've got through the presentation. Thank you again for listening. And at this time, we can address any questions and comments you have for the rest of our time together.
Here's one from Posted. Matt says, as far as designating public officials for barrier removal, is that something the ADA advisory group is responsible for, which I am part of, since I don't know who these public officials would be?
So the ADA doesn't say, or the transition plan guidance doesn't say who ultimately makes that decision. It just says there needs to be a public official responsible for the plan. Mark, do you want to comment on the decision-making process you have for choosing who's the official responsible?
Well, at the time being, I'm the program manager, and I don't see that really changing in the short term unless I can find another qualified person to give that to. But I'm available. I'm a part of the advisory group that you set on, Matt. So I certainly am the place to start. So anyway, I'm the guy.
Matt, to further answer your question, the official responsible does have to be a public employee. That is a requirement. The best practices say that that person should be qualified and have an understanding of ADA requirements. And so ADA requirements, it's the policies and procedures, but especially when it comes to the public right-of-way, having someone with engineering expertise is also of extreme benefit to understand the technical ADA design requirements. So oftentimes cities, it is common that people in the public works department of cities or transportation department play a role in implementing the ADA plan.
Hi, this is Brenda.
Hi, Brenda.
I couldn't, my raise the hand button is not working right now. But anyway, if you need this group for anything more, will you include us in another virtual meeting?
At this point, we have only scheduled this one
Okay.
virtual meeting, but as my slide right now shows, the draft plan will be up in probably February 2021, and that is open for public comment. So we welcome public comment on the plan, as well as any follow-up comments you want to send to us via email or the survey. We only intended to do one workshop.
Okay, well, I just want to say that I do appreciate, and I don't know if I speak for everyone else, everything that's being addressed through this virtual meeting and listening to us. And I feel thankful and grateful that you've included us and let us be in on this.
Absolutely. Accessibility is good for everybody, but it's the best and most important for the ADA community. So we wanted to provide ample space for hearing from you.
Right, and I know that I've had an issue with almost falling down at that intersection that I've talked to you about, because when I'm going one way, I have to lift my walker up and over the curb, and I've been just about hit once because traffic is terrible, and I don't want to get out of the crosswalk to go to Inspired Church's driveway. And I've seen one gentleman trip at the same curb, and I did not want to complain, but a couple of my friends have taken pictures of me there. And so I appreciate being able to state my opinion and my concern, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And
I would just like
go ahead.
to interject there too, Brenda. We do appreciate you making that comment. On behalf of the city, I would thank all of the participants tonight as well. I will say that we've gotten some very good comments, and in particular that intersection at State and Township. It's one and David and I have looked at a couple of times. So you've given us a good target for one of the early prioritizations that we have here now. We do have in our budget some funds for doing some targeted ADA work on an annual basis. And so that one will be one we will certainly put high on the priority list based on the comments tonight. And so we do thank you.
Thank you very much.
It looks like there's one other comment here from Clifford. He says, thanks to the city of Sedro-Woolley for stepping forward to address the ADA issues.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you for spending your Thursday night with us.
Thank you too.
I'll just say, as Jennifer's already said, my contact information is on the website as well. And if you think of something else along these lines, feel free to just text or email me that information, and I'll be glad to incorporate that in what we're doing here. That's what this is all about, this public hearing. And we also have, I think Jennifer might have described it, we have, and some of the participants tonight are a part of our ADA advisory group. And so that's the kind of things that we're working with them on, is to address these things that we as staff maybe are too close to and don't always see. So it's really good to hear these comments. I'd have to say, for Matthew's benefit, I could use some instruction on how to ride a three-wheeled bicycle. So that would be how you do those wheelies at those curves. You know, that sounds pretty exciting. So.
And Matthew posted that he is also appreciative.
All right.
What a good
Well,
one.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your evening, and please do we'll look forward to 2021, something to look forward to with our draft plan.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night, all.
Night.
Good night.